Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, and I want to do a quick update about a document that got passed by the United Nations this weekend called the Pact of the Future document. It's two parts, one on science and technology and one about the youth and future generations. It is quite egregious, and it was done by a procedure called the silence procedure, which makes it a pact, and if no one objected, it is automatically adopted and put into the record as being completely adopted. This is the World Health Organization's runaround, or end around. Since they were not able to get the World Health Organization treaty passed, they decided to take it to the General Assembly, and it is even more egregious than what the World Health Organization was wanting to get passed. Let me just read you something really quickly about what is inside of this pact that is now being accepted by 193 nations around the world and equally open-armed accepted by our current administration. Everyone, it says that this is the power structure of fully digital and maximized for the control of the masses. Everyone will be expected to have a biometric digital ID that marks them not just as citizens of an individual country, but as a global citizen. So anytime you hear global citizen or anytime you hear sustainability, think that this is an egregious thing that's happening at the level of the World Health Organization and the United Nations. Anyone that has a dissonant opinion will be labeled as misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation and memory hold. Perpetrators for unapproved information will be fact-checked and punished by the system, which will be operated and enforced by artificial intelligence. Punishments will include being locked out of one's bank account, being unable to make certain purchases, unable to get on an airplane, on a subway, drive on public roads. This is the future, according to the world's self-appointed overlords at the United Nations. These are unelected bureaucrats that are making decisions about our country, our sovereignty around the world. Nothing could be more important at this point in time than to get prepared. Have water, food, digital access, flashlights, a way to communicate with family and friends. Now is really the time to get involved and get prepared, because this is what's coming. Our Congress is sitting on its hands. There was a press conference on the 17th about this, and no further action has been taken. So it's up to us to mobilize and to go forward, particularly with your local sheriffs, to get your constitutional sheriffs to say, this isn't going to be allowed in my county. Thank you very much. Take action. We've been talking about the onset of one world order, one world government, one world religion, one world money for a long time. Well, it's no longer coming. It's here.
These are dark days for freedom, folks, and the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization act to oppose our freedoms every single day. Welcome to Training Tuesday, and the Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, and our X-Space is simulcast. Well, the World Economic Forum's socialist agenda has been exposed by freedom defenders. The World Health Organization's authoritarian pandemic treaty effort has also been stalled by freedom-loving citizens around the world. But now, in spite of all of our best efforts, 193 nations, as you just heard, including the United States, at the UN successfully passed the Pact for the Future a little over a week ago. Only a small group of just 7 countries didn't join the consensus, but they didn't oppose or abstain from the agreement either. Therefore, it was passed by what you just heard there, something called the silence procedure, which meant that if no country objected, it was automatically adopted. This enables the power structure to fully digitize the control of the masses with the expectation that everyone will have some form of a biometric digital ID that marks them as a global citizen. In this pact, member states also agree to put policies into place such as ESG social credit scores into banking, so they can impose their left-wing values through the financial system, which we've seen some of that already. The pact also contains the promise for member states to have universal access to sexual and reproductive health for women. So the agreement includes universal access to abortion, the murder of little babies. The pact also calls for an emergency platform. This may be the most egregious that I want to talk about today, in which the UN Secretary General, think about the people that have been in that position, in the event of a global shock, and that's a term they use, he gets to define what it is. He gains all kinds of vague powers to deal with this global shock event, no matter where it is in the world. Think about that, even if it's in the United States. And of course, at the end of the period that he gets to react to the global shock, the Secretary General gets to decide if he can renew his powers over and over again endlessly. Well, my guest today spoke at that September 17th congressional press conference opposing the pact. Reggie Littlejohn is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, co-founder of the Stop Vaccine Passports Task Force, co-chair of the Sovereignty Coalition, which you've heard me talk about before and have guests on to talk from that organization already, and president of the Anti-Globalist International Organization. Her list of achievements would take me an hour to list, but it suffices to say that Ms. Littlejohn is a fighter for freedom unlike any that our enemies have ever seen. And she's my friend. Reggie, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's been too long.
Wow, that was quite the introduction, Colonel Maness. So thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Look, we've been talking about what you guys were talking about on your press conference in September. I've watched it a couple of times. Why? Here's the question I wanted to ask you since I saw that is, why were there so few Congresspeople at that press conference?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, there has been, regarding the Pact for the Future, there's been a complete silence. As Dr. Tenpenny had mentioned, this was passed by the silence procedure. And so what that means is that there's a committee within the UN that negotiates things, and once they have come to a consensus, they send it to the Secretary General. He distributes it to the 193 member nations, and if nobody objects, it's adopted. So that means there's no time for public debate, and because they're calling it a pact as opposed to a treaty, there's no ratification process. And so there was basically a media blackout before the Summit for the Future. The mainstream media wasn't really commenting on it at all, and then even the alternative media was not really commenting on it because the freedom movement had been so focused on the World Health Organization and trying to prevent this pandemic treaty from going through, and then also opposing the amendments to the international health regulations. I was among those that went to Geneva on June 1st and was there when this thing passed. I was one of 10 lawyers internationally that spoke out at a press conference there about that. And then summer hit, and then in the fall, all of a sudden, boom, it's the Summit for the Future, and the movement had not built the momentum against this that we did build against the World Health Organization international health regulation amendments.
Wow. So the pact itself, it sounds pretty dang dangerous from what Dr. Tenpenny said and everything and what I've read. Let's dig through this thing a little bit. The facts are that it's a pact to agree to censoring their people, the people of these nations that agree to this, right?
Okay, so yes, I would say yes, but they don't say it that way. Okay, so this is why it's important to have people with a legal degree, and others to analyze or to translate into normal English what they're talking about. So for example, they talk about internet or digital literacy. That's the word that they use, literacy. What does that mean? That means brainwashing our kids and brainwashing the adults to think that there are only certain outlets that you should trust, meaning the ABC, NBC, CNN, all of those, and that they should not trust people like you and me because we're not part of those mainstream platforms. That's what internet literacy is. And then they talk about the need to control misinformation and disinformation and hate speech. So they don't define these terms, but you can see from their past actions how they're going to be defined, which is that misinformation and disinformation is going to be anything that is a dissident voice, that it counters the narrative of the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the CDC, or any other governmental organ worldwide that is promoting these things. So this is a thing, Colonel Maness. This is like the Chinese Communist model writ large all over the world. And as you know, Xi Jinping said a couple of years ago that he wants China to be at the forefront of the new, global governance, which is what they call the new world government, the one world government. And in China, very distinct from the United States. In the United States, we have a Christian-based, a faith-based founders constitution. We believe that we have certain God-given, inalienable rights. They can't be taken away from us because they were given to us by God. Whereas the Chinese Communist Party believes that they are God, basically, and that they give rights and they take them away. And you can see where that has led in China to just incredible oppression and horrific forced abortion under the one-child policy, religious persecution, goes on and on. That's going to be happening now worldwide through this Pact for the Future.
It's very scary. It should be very scary to anybody that knows anything about this stuff, Reggie. Well, we've got a hand up in our live audience. I do take a question when we get the opportunity. So let's go ahead and take a question before we go to the first commercial break. And Shell is our host over there. Go ahead, Shell.
We have lived by faith, sir.
Thank you, Colonel, sir. I appreciate your service. And thank you, Miss Littlejohn, as well. It's great that you brought that up about China, because that's what I was going to bring up was, I felt like, the whole social credit score that China was pushing was kind of like a test on this. And with what John Kerry said just recently about, minimizing the amount of conversation and, calling it misinformation or trying to take away our freedom of speech, how do you think the two together play out in this push towards that one world situation? Many of us who are Christian believe in the understanding that this is, heading towards the end times. And I'm not trying to bring up prophecy, but we understood what was at stake. And I know that that's why we're fighting hard for our country. But where do you think this lines up with the push towards, minimizing us, taking away our freedoms like the Constitution?
I like to call this, first of all, thank you for your question. And it just shows a lot of research on your part and a lot of soul searching, and I appreciate that. I believe that we are living in a digital gulag, and that they're just waiting to snap this trap shut. So for those who don't understand or don't understand the details of the China social credit system, I'll just quickly go through this, because that's where my original expertise was in China. So under the China social credit system, they surveil every aspect of your life. So they've got real-time facial recognition, real-time geolocation. They know, where you work, where you live, all your social media posts. Then your criminal history, your medical history, your internet search history, your internet spending history. Whether or not you listen to Xi Jinping thought at night, you can get in trouble for not doing that. You have to have your brainwashing session. You can't just turn it on and ignore it, because you have to answer questions at the end to demonstrate that you actually listened to this, okay? And they pull all that together, and you get a social credit score, and that social credit score determines your level of freedom. So if you are a complete Chinese, I don't know, sheep, and just follow the party line on everything, and for sure get your vaccinations on time and get every booster that they ask you to get, and never raise any issues, then what happens is you can live what looks like a normal life. You can travel, you can, etc. But if you start acting up, especially if you do something, it's a real affront, like not refusing to be vaccinated. I think in China they would just, under COVID, they would just drag you out if you did that. There was no choice. But you could suffer, repercussions, like you will not be able to borrow money to buy a home or start a business. You will, your kid won't be able to go to school. You'll lose your job. If you keep it up, they will sever you from your bank accounts or your credit cards. Like what happened to the truckers in Canada. This has already happened in the West. And if you keep it up in China, they'll just disappear you, right? And all the technology of that has spread to the developed countries. We have all the technology to do that, and we know that is their plan to worldwide, because Xi Jinping says he wanted to basically have the China's imprint on global governance. But if you go onto the world, and if you go onto the World Economic Forum website, there's a chart. It's called Digital IDs. You can just look it up, WEF, or World Economic Forum Digital IDs chart. And the World Health Organization and the European Union together have been rolling these out for about a year. And they say, oh, it's to keep you safe. That's always the pretext, in case of a pandemic. But those digital IDs have to do with a whole lot more than just your medical status, okay? You will need a digital ID and be in good standing. In other words, you need to be vaccinated, etc., in order to open a bank account, in order to do online transactions, in order to travel, in order to own a communications device like a cell phone or a computer, in order to pay your taxes, in order to access government benefits like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And then they have a whole other section on 15-minute cities, and we could discuss that at some point if we have time in this hour.
Absolutely.
But they want to they want to have control over every aspect of our lives, and then through this misinformation and disinformation and so-called hate speech, there is, in my opinion, a worldwide abuse, or maybe not worldwide, but certainly in the developed world, abuse of hate speech laws. So that if you're in favor of anything that is like from a biblical perspective, for example, if you're pro-life, pro-family, and also especially if you're a traditional Catholic, and there's I can get into that as well, but they can characterize, if you tweet things in that vein, they can characterize that as hate speech, and then you become an enemy of the state, and then you lose a lot of your constitutional rights. So, I mean, it's hard to overstate how important this moment is, this inflection point. If we don't band together to stop this thing, then this digital gulag, this trap will snap shut, and there will be no escape.
You're absolutely right, Reggie. Well, we got to take a commercial break real quick. When we come back, we'll see we're not alone. President Milei from Argentina spoke about that at the UN this week. But I want to continue talking about this issue because I don't think people really understand the tentacles and the reach of the system that the UN countries just signed up to. And it really is a global government, a one world government system. We'll be right back with Reggie Littlejohn.
We live in uncertain times. In fact, we live at a time when our own governments all over the world are warning us that there could be big problems with our power grid. World War III seems to be right on the horizon. Let me ask you this. Do you have a satellite phone? Should communications go down with cell towers? Do you have a satellite phone to get a hold of that college student or your spouse who travels, whatever it might be, to get a hold of your senior adult parents? We have satellite phones at worldviewtalk.com, and you get the satellite phone for free when you sign up for their very reasonable payment programs for the service. Sign up for the service with a reasonable contract, get the satellite phone for free. WorldviewTalk.com. You'll also find they have, well, what I now have, which is a solar generator. Yeah, I have a gas generator, an LP propane generator, but what if that goes down? I want to back up to my backup. So I now have a solar generator as well. You'll find them at worldviewtalk.com. Check it out today, worldviewtalk.com.
This is the UN General Assembly today, Tuesday, September 24th. There was a lot of hoopla about the Pact of Freedom. Here is the President of Argentina.
Individuals, regardless of who promotes these or how big the consensus is in this institution. For this reason, I'd like to officially express our dissent on the Pact for the Future that was signed on Sunday, and I invite all nations of the free world to support us, not only in relation to this pact, but also in the establishment of a new agenda for this noble institution, that is the agenda for freedom.
Yeah, not at the UN. They banned the press.
That Argentina, the Republic of Argentina, will abandon its policy of historic neutrality and will be on the vanguard in the struggle for the defense of freedom. Because, as Thomas Paine said, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. Long live freedom, God damn it. Thank you very much.
Long live freedom, God damn it.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Argentine Republic.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and folks, we're talking about dark days for freedom. Imagine the president of Argentina invoking Thomas Paine. And my guest today is Ms. Reggie Littlejohn, who is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, a co-chair of the Sovereignty Coalition, and the president of the Anti-Globalist activity. That is a new one to me. I just signed the manifesto today, Reggie. Welcome back. You know, that is something that I'm concerned about, and later in the show, we'll show a clip of John Kerry, bashing the First Amendment. And it's just, we're in a time in the world where we have to find the allies of freedom in places other than within the borders of the United States of America, for goodness sake. It's striking, it's concerning, and what's even more concerning is that not enough people, your name and your organization, the Anti-Globalist International Organization, should be a household name on everybody's lips, especially considering what's happening today in the world, and we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, there's a lot of current events happening in the last few hours and 24 hours that we can talk about in relation to this stuff. But you mentioned the digital ID and the digital currency. Now, this is different than what they were able to do to the truckers in Canada when you start combining these two capabilities in a worldwide effort with every country supporting it, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. So this is the thing. The technology exists right now that if we are dissenters, like I would say maybe you and I are dissenters, okay, they have the ability to just cut us off from our credit cards and our bank accounts. And we've seen instances of people being debanked, et cetera. And what happened with the Canadian truckers when they had this protest regarding the vaccine mandates is they just simply got cut off from their credit cards and their bank accounts, which is a way of ending, forcing the end of a legitimate and legal protest. And they did it not only to the truckers, but they did it also even to the people who donated to them. Okay, so that is a very sort of draconian, ham-handed kind of punishment. What happens with a central bank digital currency is much more subtle and can be nuanced. So this is the thing. With a central bank digital currency, all transactions go through the central bank of the country. So our central bank is the Federal Reserve. And so what that means is that the government is going to, and also important to this is to get rid of cash. So with cash is anonymous. You can go and buy anything you want with cash, and no one knows what you bought. No one knows who you bought it from. It's just a transaction between you and the seller, and that's it. With a central bank digital currency, they know, who's buying what from whom, and they can control it. So these things are called programmable. It's a programmable currency. It's not just on and off, like severing you from your bank account or from your credit card. They can get so minute that they can say, and all these other things are being combined, right? So they can say, you know what? We noticed that your cholesterol is high, so you already had a steak this week. So when you go up to the counter to buy your Big Mac, your credit card or your central bank digital currency will not work because they are deciding for you that you do not get a second serving of fatty meat that week. Or they can do things like say, you have to spend all your money within 6 months. Why would they do that? They would do that to prevent us from saving so that we will become dependent on the government. Or they could say, you're not vaccinated. You're not allowed to leave your house. And so your money will not work anywhere except from your house. Okay? Or they can say, you're a dissident and you've been such a thorn in our side that we're just turning you off and you're not going to be able to buy anything. And so you're gonna. Can you imagine what would happen in your life if you could not pay any of your bills and you could not buy food or anything or gas or anything else? But they can do that. So that's the difference between cash or even just cutting somebody out from their credit card or their bank account and a central bank digital currency.
We're in big trouble. Now, one of the things that these folks keep saying, and I've heard Tedros say it, well, the national laws have to apply first because we're all nice people and we want to be friends and all that. So we're not going to do anything that national laws don't apply to. That's not accurate, is it?
Okay, so listen to this. In the World Health Organization's International Health Regulation amendments, every country has to appoint an IHR, in other words, International Health Regulations Authority. I call this person the IHR czar. And so what that person's responsibility is going to be is the implementation of directives from the World Health Organization, which changes the character of the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is supposed to be just advisory, but now they're implementing. And part of their job is to adjust local laws, so the local laws, state laws, and national laws to conform with the World Health Organization's international health regulations. So yeah, they're going to say, oh, well, we don't want it to, break any of your local laws, but we want you to change those laws so they don't break what we're trying to do. This is typical circular reasoning on their part.
It is. Well, let's go over to the audience. We got a couple of hands up over there. We'll take a question before we go to this break real quick. Shell, go ahead.
We have Sofa, sir.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Ms. Littlejohn. Earlier this morning, Glenn Beck had someone talking about this same subject, but he went in different directions. And one of the things that he went into was the history of like Barack Obama, where he would do word games where it wasn't a treaty, it was the Paris Accords and things like that. And because it's not called a treaty, it doesn't have to have 2/3 Senate approval because you have to have 2/3 advising consent of the Senate. Is there anything that we can do as either lawsuits or lobbying of senators to have this change so that if there's any kind of commitments that the president is making on behalf of the country, regardless of what the synonym is that they use for treaty, it must have 2/3 advise and consent vote from Senate?
Yes. All right. So you bring up a really important point. All right. So here's the thing. The Pact for the Future is a treaty. And I would also hold that even the international health regulation amendments are a treaty. Why do I say that? Because the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties defines a treaty basically as a written instrument between nations, making an agreement between nations. These are written instruments making agreements between nations. And so, Barack Obama and, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, all of these globalists, they don't want to call it a treaty because they don't want to trigger the requirement of Senate consent. But they are treaties and they do need Senate consent, but that doesn't mean they're going to get Senate consent. Okay, we have to push for that, especially if we get the wrong person in office. So, for example, the Biden-Harris administration has been pushing, both in the World Health Organization and in the United Nations, for the International Health Regulation amendments in the case of the World Health Organization, the Pact for the Future in the case of the United Nations. They're not going to say it's a treaty. They want it to go through. They know it's not going to pass the Senate, so they don't want to submit it to the Senate. But the House passed a bill saying that anything that is that is an agreement that comes out of the World Health Organization is going to be treated as a treaty, and it can only be implemented in the United States on the advice and consent of the Senate. The Senate has not yet passed the companion bill, but one thing that you can do if you want to do something is go to antiglobalist.net. That's my website, antiglobalist, one word, .net. Sign the manifesto, which Colonel Maness did, I guess, just this morning. And that will put you on my newsletter list, and then you will get actions. So one of the things that we want to do is run a campaign for there to be a similar bill with respect to the United Nations, that any agreement that comes from the United Nations, whether it's called a pact, an accord, an agreement, a framework convention, I don't care what they call it, is going to be treated as a treaty and will only take effect in the United States with the advice and consent of the Senate. So please sign our manifesto so that when we run that campaign, which we should be doing shortly, you will be notified, and then you can sign your name to the campaign, and then an email will go to your senators, your congressmen, and also to and anyone else that we decide that it should go to. So, for example, the Biden, Harris, HHS, and anybody else that we think that would need to know about this. And this is very, very effective in terms of raising the visibility of the issue in Congress, because right now the congressional representatives don't know about it, and they will want to learn about it if they hear enough from you saying this is important, you need to stop it. That's how we can reach them and get them to take action.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a whole lot of, it doesn't take huge numbers of people to do this. A few thousand gets their attention, Reggie. Well, we got to take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about this global shock event emergency powers aspect of the pact, and also a little bit about what the states can do. Because here in the U.S., we still have a constitution with states' rights. I know the leftists don't like hearing that term, but we do. And I think, and as a matter of fact, I know we have an ability to stop things like the World Health Organization right at the state level. We'll be right back with Reggie Littlejohn, the head of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, the co-chair of the Sovereignty Coalition, and the anti-globalist movement, antiglobalist.net, to sign up to get those emails and those what are called the line acts. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show on World YouTube.
on this.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and we're learning all about globalism and what's happened at the United States with this Pact for the Future that was passed on a silence agreement where nobody even objected to it in time before it took effect by the 193 countries that were there at the United Nations just a little bit over a week ago. And my guest today is Reggie Littlejohn, who is the head of a lot of these, some of these organizations that are fighting against globalism, fighting against things like like vaccine passports, digital ID, centralized bank digital currency, which are all pieces of this one world government under this Pact for the Future that the United Nations has passed, and we have to have these opportunities to defeat it. And Reggie, one of the things you were talking about before is getting Congress to take action about the treaty part of that. But there are pathways that I've worked with the Sovereignty Coalition folks and have made a recommendation to my own state legislature here to pass a law at the state level to prohibit obeying organizations like the World Health Organization, and that their powers will essentially be null and void in the borders of the state of Mississippi. In my case, how do folks help their legislators find legislation where that could be implemented at?
Well, there was a letter that went out, and Joe Gebbia, who is the head of State Shield and a member of the Sovereignty Coalition, I think gets a lot of the credit for this. But almost half of the governors in the United States signed a statement saying that they will not comply with any directives from the World Health Organization. And, that is sort of the last bastion. And even, constitutional sheriffs can say, you know what, you can have whatever laws you want, but this is not happening in my territory. I think we need to be fighting on the local level, the state level, the national level. The issue with the state level, I think it's absolutely essential. I think that the 10th Amendment says that the U.S. government only gets the federal government only gets enumerated powers, and healthcare is not in those powers, and so they can't shove some kind of healthcare directive down to the states because they don't have the authority to do that. I would like to see a similar thing for the United Nations, although the United Nations is not doing it on the basis of healthcare, other than working through the WHO. And we're going to talk about complex global shocks. But I think that it would be good for them to sign something, a similar statement with respect to the United Nations. The thing that's going to be the challenge is if we don't get, let's say, and I'm not endorsing anybody, but Trump did withdraw us from the World Health Organization. Biden put us right back in. Biden and Harris have been behind all this stuff, really pushing it. And if we don't get a change in administration, it's going to be very hard for the states to resist. They can say they're going to resist. They can do their best to resist. But the federal government can do things like just say, okay, guess what? We're shutting off, all of your education budget and any other federal monies that you're getting. You go ahead and resist, and we're just going to shut off your money. I mean, there are reprisals that can happen. And that's why the presidential election is really important, because it's hugely important. Because if you have somebody in office who is, like, for example, Donald Trump, who is just not playing the globalist game, and will withdraw us from the WHO, could possibly even withdraw us from the United Nations, and he will stand as a shield between us and the globalists. But then we can resist. But if we have somebody like Harris, who's behind all of this stuff, and she's trying to get all the different companies to maybe not let you fly, or not let you into a restaurant, or even not be able to order off of Amazon. Who knows if you're not vaccinated from whatever is the next pandemic, or whatever they're doing, if you're doing whatever they don't want you to be doing. It's going to be really, really hard for anyone to resist. And that's why I'm saying we need to act now. We've got about 5 weeks. And something that people can do is go to town hall meetings, go to where candidates are meeting and grill them on this. You know, what is your position on the World Health Organization, International Health Regulations amendments? What is your position on the Pact for the Future? What's your position on global governance? And make it a campaign issue. That will be very important in terms of getting a government in November that will resist this, and we need our government to protect us.
Yeah, exactly right. You know, especially from this aspect of this Pact for the Future. Now, we've talked about this. I've worked for you on the Stop Vax Passports task force, and so we've talked, a lot about, and I've been listening to conversations with you and others about these types of issues with global government and those kind of things. But this global shock event, I call it emergency powers given over to the UN Secretary General, who can unlimited way renew them as long as he wants to, or she, and everything. And I think about some of the people that have been in there, and then I think about what's happening right today in the last 24 hours. Iran has fired 500 or so ballistic missiles at Israel. The longshoremen in the United States are on strike, and it's going to impact the global supply chain. The hurricane stuff that can be blamed on, and I'm not saying it's accurate, on climate change. And we have these, let's just take those three events. Under this concept, I can see a UN Secretary General, somebody like a Tedros or the last guy, or even this current gentleman, saying, "Oh, we're in a global shock event. I need to take control of this situation and start implementing these emergency powers." I mean, I know that was based on the pandemic response, I think, originally in this concept, but that's where I see this going.
Oh, that's absolutely right, Colonel Maness. I mean, so these globalists seek to take over either through what they will call a complex global shock, and I can get into what that is, or through what they also call a polycrisis. And so what you've just described here is a polycrisis, where you've got several crises going on all at the same time. The purpose of this is to sow fear and confusion, and also just to drive people to say, save me government, so that we will do whatever they say. And then they come out as the knight in shining armor, as, what we need to do here is everybody needs to have an interoperable international digital ID and central bank digital currencies, and you will, own nothing and you will be happy, but at least you'll be safe. And, so that they're trying to create the conditions where they can take over, where people will give up their freedoms. And the thing is that people are more likely to give up their freedoms if they are terrified, especially on the basis of a health crisis. Like if they're worried about their own health, or their children's health, or their parents' health, or their loved ones' health. That's why the way that the World Health Organization is so pernicious, is because it preys on people's fear, and it preys on people's love for their loved ones, and it abuses them. It's an abuse of compassion, really is what it is. And if you don't want to kill grandma, you'll get vaccinated. That's an abuse of compassion, much less not even true. But yeah, the complex global shocks works like this. So there's the Pact for the Future. So this document right here, it's like 60 pages long. And in the Pact for the Future, there is Article 54. And it talks about the central role of the United Nations in responding to complex global shocks. So they're identifying themselves as the ones who are calling the shots. And then they want to consider approaches to strengthen the United Nations system in response to complex global shocks. Now, that wording, complex global shocks, keys us into a policy brief that came out in March of this year about complex global shocks. And so that gives more detail about the powers that the Secretary General will be able to operationalize. And what it says in that is that the Secretary General asks the United Nations to approve an emergency platform. And this is important about the emergency. They always want to have an emergency. They want to say it's an emergency, because if it's an emergency, that gives them permission, or that's a pretext on which they suspend our constitutional rights. And by the way, you know, the framers of the Constitution had pandemics in their day too, and they did not say anything about suspending our constitutional rights in the case of a pandemic or any other kind of a shocking event. But they want an emergency platform that will operationalize automatically in the case of a complex global shock. So what does it mean to operationalize automatically? What it means is that once the document is passed, and it was passed on September 23rd, I believe it was, you know, they don't need to go back to the nations to say, can I have this power or that power? Do you agree that this is a complex global shock? No, it's already passed. It's going to operationalize automatically. And the way that they define complex global shock is in that document. There's a chart called complex global shocks. And basically a complex global shock can involve either climate change. So you've got the World Health Organization with complex global shocks with pandemics. You've got the United Nations with climate change. That climate change is a complex global shock. So climate change could be the banks going down, could be the grid going down, could be the internet going down, could be an interruption in supply chain. So we've got a potential for that right now with the longshoremen. And then, or they even say it could be a major event in outer space, which they don't define. So I guess, you know, if two galaxies collide, the UN takes over. And then they've got a category called black swan events, which is just any unforeseen thing that they didn't think of that they can call a complex global shock and operationalize this platform automatically.
Wow, unbelievable. Well, we got to take one more break, Reggie. When we come back, we'll take one. Got a question left from the audience, but we'll also hear from Mr. John Kerry in this infamous clip about the First Amendment. We'll be right back with Reggie Littlejohn on the Rob Maness Show at Worldview Tube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go and people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and we are in dark days for freedom. My guest today is the president of Anti-Globalist International, Reggie Littlejohn. And Reggie, the answer to speech that we don't like is more speech and win the argument. if the government can't win the argument, there's something wrong with its facts, right?
Carlos, I am choking. I mean, that clip just makes me just gag.
It
I'm
does.
sorry. Let's see. Let me just take it. All right. So I'm back now. I mean, I find what he said to be absolutely heinous and horrendous, but it's a time when he said the quiet part out loud. All right. What is he saying? Let's just take this apart a little bit. All right. Okay. He says that, you know, people now can self-select their news. Okay, what does that mean? That means they listen to you and me instead of listening to CNN. This is a problem for them. So that it's harder to build consensus. It's hard to build consensus because people have access to the real facts and to alternate views. Okay, this is the whole thing of the marketplace of ideas. You know, CNN has their view. You and I have our view. Viewers should watch both and then decide for themselves. You know, may the best argument win. But they want to control the narrative. So they can't guarantee the facts. Guarantee the facts? I mean, you know, what is he, you know,
yeah.
In what world does he think that he gets to guarantee the facts? You know, that reminds me of this woman, what was it? She was from the World Economic Forum or something, that we own the science. They don't own facts. And then he says the First Amendment is a major block to building this consensus. In other words, the fact that we have freedom of speech is a huge block to them being able to tell us what to think and to give us only one narrative. And so that we need to win this election to implement change. That should send chills down the spine of every person. What change do they think they're going to implement to address this situation other than to take away the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment for a reason, is the most important foundation of our democracy, and that's what he's talking about. Okay, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and he is the second United States Secretary of State in as many months to say something like that, Reggie. We've got one more question in the audience. I want to take that before we close out the show, but I got a lot more to say about this, as I know you do. Go ahead, Shell.
We have Cajun lady, sir.
Thank you, Shaw. I appreciate you. And thank you, Colonel Rob. I appreciate your time for having me up. I just needed a little clarification when I was listening a moment ago. Did I understand that it was said that they passed that document on the 23rd? Because I thought that they had adopted it, but I didn't know if I misunderstood or not. Could you give me clarification? With the WHO, the UN, I believe, when they met.
The UN. Okay, thank you for that question. You're right. It was adopted. Passed implies that there was a debate and a vote, and I might have used that term just because that's what I'm so used to. I'm used to Congress where there's a debate and a vote and things passed. But no, it was adopted. It was adopted through a silence procedure, and so that what happened on the 23rd is that its adoption was noted. Okay, that's all. It was adopted through the silence procedure before the 23rd, and then the adoption was noted on, it was either the 22nd or the 23rd.
Is that as if it had passed under a vote? Does it have the same legal status with the United Nations?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. And this whole silence procedure was something that they agreed to under COVID when they could not meet together. So they couldn't have a debate. They were not able to meet. And so they said, okay, well, let's do this silence procedure so that we can keep conducting business even during COVID. And then they kept it on after COVID when there was no reason to. Everybody was there in New York. They could have had a debate, but they didn't want one because they didn't want us finding out about it until after it was adopted, because they knew that there would be backlash.
Exactly. And John Kerry just said that, as you said, the quiet part out loud is we have elites in this country. And it's not just on the Democrat side. There are people on the other side of the aisle that want to control thought, control ideas, and suppress ideas that they don't like, that disagrees with their government policy. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you people like Ms. Littlejohn and myself, we're not going to stand for that. I'm going to fight it. I know you are, Reggie. You are fighting it with your organization and everything. Let's talk about the Sovereignty Coalition just a little bit, and then the AGI, so folks can understand how they came about and a little bit more on what they can do, because these organizations are taking action. They don't just, they're just not a bunch of people sitting around talking all the time, right?
Okay, so the way this happened is, I told you I was, dealing with China, and then when I saw these, this vaccine passport, it's like, oh my gosh, this could institute the China social credit system. So I co-founded the Stop Vaccine Passports Task Force with Frank Gaffney, and you were a member of that, and we did, I think, the best set of webinars that we've ever had on this digital gulag, and also on issues concerning the vaccines itself. Then I said, oh my gosh, what's happening is this is threatening our national sovereignty. And so then I co-founded the Sovereignty Coalition, and we've had tremendous success, outsized success in terms of alerting Congress and moving the whole narrative to fight this thing. And then I said, you know what? This is not just a national issue. This is an international issue, and we need the whole world. The whole world is about to come out under this globalist trap. And so I founded Anti-Globalist International to basically take the Sovereignty Coalition model worldwide. And I would ask everybody, please, to go to anti-globalist, one word, antiglobalist.net, and sign the manifesto. And that way I can keep you apprised of things that we're doing nationally and internationally, because we're going to be focused on, the United States. That's where we're from, but we're also going to be focused on the whole world and things that need to be done internationally to stop this thing.
Yeah, and how can folks, what kind of help do you need besides that, which is critically important, obviously the most important thing, but can people, do you need help with funding or volunteers, those kind of things?
Gosh, we really need help with funding. It's so amazing that you would even ask that. I'm the only person that's an employee of the organization. I need, and going up against the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, some of the richest organizations and richest people and most evil people in the world, I would need a staff. So, please pray for my protection. Pray, that I could get a great staff, and pray for the funding to pay them, because I cannot do this by myself. So that is something that would be wonderful. It's prayers and donations. If you want to donate, you can go to antiglobalist.net. There's a button to the right, red button that says donate. It's super easy to find, and anything would be really appreciated. Thank you, Colonel Maness, for even asking that question. That's unusual.
Well, thank you, Reggie. I've had your socials information up in the website, antiglobalist.net, the whole show here. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy, and you just dedicated a whole hour to this audience on Worldview Tube, our new network that we just came out on Roku. By the way, yesterday we went live, so so you can catch us there. And just thank you so much for doing what you do. You are in our prayers, and anything we can do to continue to help. Our folks are active people, and they will do that.
God bless you, and thank you so very much, you and your viewers.
Thanks, Reggie. Well, tomorrow, Whistleblower Wednesday, Chief Ann Fleet, the author of Mao's America, she's going to help us further understand the communism and Marxism of this global governance effort that's happening around the world, and is also affecting the United States of America through the leftist Democrat Party, right here on Worldview Tube. I'm Rob Maness, and I'll see you then.